communications. And today we've got a real interesting presentation lined up that's going to take a look at how companies can revamp their cybersecurity strategies through what's called the Zero Trust framework, and talk about how it can protect against malware. Today's webinar is being recorded. You'll get an email with a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation tomorrow. And you can always access all of our webinar recordings at alta.org/webinars. That's alta.org/webinars. You can also download a PDF of the presentation from the handout section in the GoToWebinar window pane. If anytime you have a question, submit them in the questions box. We'll hold some time at the end for Q&A. Do need to thank SoftPro for sponsoring today's webinar. And before introducing today's speakers, here's a short message from SoftPro.
Introducing Closings Live, a customizable communication tool available for use with SoftPro's title and escrow software. With Closings Live, you can communicate securely and directly with the buyer, seller, real estate agent, attorney, and lender to track the status of your closings, both from your desktop and through the Closings Live mobile app. Closings Live allows you to customize email and notifications, automate tasks, and share documents to track the status of your closings in real time. We can even create a custom Closings Live website branded for your company, so it's familiar to your customers. And your branding will carry through to the mobile app as well. Closings Live is simple, easy, and most importantly, secure. To learn more, visit softprocorp.com/closingslive.
Okay. All right. Thank you, SoftPro. All right, Daryl, let me make you the presenter now. All right, there we go. All right, thank you, SoftPro, for that message. Now I'll introduce today's speakers. Joining us, we have two experts from ForcePoint. ForcePoint is a software company that develops computer security software and data protection. Joining us, we have Daryl Crook. Daryl is a senior sales engineer for ForcePoint. And we also have Gary Ford, who is a senior sales specialist. Daryl and Gary, I'll turn the presentation over to you and let you get to it. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Jeremy. Hopefully you can hear me just fine.
Yep, we hear you good.
All right, so I'm going to walk through just a few things today to talk about this concept of zero trust and how it applies in the cybersecurity world. And I've got Gary here with me to help out. He'll be answering questions in the chat, and Gary, feel free to jump in at any point if you've got some additional information to share. From an agenda perspective, a couple of things we're going to talk about here. We're going to introduce the concept of zero trust, what it is, where it came from, talk about why it's important and how it applies in the real world. And then we'll look at malware risks specifically and how we can apply zero trust principles to ensure that we are operating in a safe world, if you will, when it comes to the risk of malware that's out there. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some other ways to optimize zero trust principles through different aspects of cybersecurity. So let's dive in. As we get going here, just a little bit about our company, ForcePoint. We are a company that has been around for a long time, really formed and designed to support both commercial and government customers with their specific requirements and missions, and really designed to, we host several different types or categories of software products in the cybersecurity space that help industries, anything from data loss prevention and protection to firewall technology to what we call cross-domain technology, so allowing different classified networks to talk to each other in the government space. A lot of very complex environments, complex problems that we love to get involved in and help solve. So that is just a little bit about us. So let's talk a little bit about zero trust, to this concept of zero trust. Several years ago, somebody came up with this moniker, trust but verify. And the idea, right, is that you have, once you've vetted somebody, you can trust them. So once an employee has gone through the background check process, they've been hired into the company, you can now trust them and give them access and give them the keys to the kingdom, and they can go and get their job done. But you may have a process once a year to validate that background check, or some processes to understand and make sure that they're still valid employees. It's kind of like a castle moat standard. So when you talk about the idea of gaining access to network resources and the company's resources, either from a physical perspective or from a digital cybersecurity perspective. In the past, it's been this idea of a castle and a moat. So you have, as an employee, you have access to a castle, and you get access to that by crossing the moat. And once you are allowed to cross that moat and enter the castle, you have access to all the resources in that castle. And that's been kind of the cybersecurity position for a long time, that as an employee, you are trusted and allowed to have access to those resources. The challenge, of course, in the cybersecurity world today is that a lot of user credentials get hacked and compromised, and so companies are assuming some risk by explicitly trusting their employees in everything that they do. And it's not to say that employees are bad, just that we need to make sure that they're safe in everything that they do. So the zero trust concept comes in and changes that idea of trust but verify, and flips it kind of on its head and says, instead of trusting, we're essentially going to implement zero trust, meaning we don't trust anybody, we don't trust any user credential, we don't trust anything explicitly, and we force everything to be verified, and we limit access to those who need that access. So for example, you might have, let's say in your title offices, you might have a fax machine or a printer. And generally speaking, those resources might be available to all employees. They might have physical access to those devices. They might be able to send faxes, receive faxes, send print jobs, but not every employee probably needs access to those devices. So you probably have custodial staff, for example, that do not need to send faxes on the fax machine, but they can probably access it because they have keys to get in and empty trash bins and that sort of thing. So zero trust really takes this concept and says, let's limit who can see what resources on the network in terms of accessing digital content and data. So for example, going back to our castle and moat methodology here, if you're a soldier for the castle, you might have access to the armory, but you probably don't have access to the kitchen because you're not a chef. So you can limit who has access inside of the network to those company resources based on job responsibilities, based on other attributes and factors about those users. And the idea is to limit access where possible, and where you need to grant access, to use additional methods to prove or have those users, those employees prove their identities. That could be through some enhanced methods like multi-factor authentication, maybe a PIN that gets sent as a text message to your phone, might be a push notification coming to an application, a Google Authenticator or something like that. So there are various different ways that you can have users identify themselves and push or force that verification. So rather than trust but verify, we're essentially flipping that around and saying don't trust anybody, and do continuous verification to make sure that they are who they say they are, and that we are limiting access to the resources that they need to do their job. Okay, so where did this come from, this concept? So there are, of course, there are, Gartner and Forrester, there are vendors out there that talk about and bring forward these concepts and then kind of push them into the cybersecurity space. And Forrester is one that has done that around zero trust. They've built a 7-pillar methodology, and it's really designed around never trust and always verify. So rather than just trust, but trust and verify, it's really gone to the extreme of both ends. So not only should you not trust, but you should never trust. And then on top of that, you should not just verify periodically, but verify continuously to make sure that those who have access are the right people and employees, and that they have the right level of access that they need to do their job and nothing more. Then there are a couple of other publications out there. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has released a special publication that they call 800-207, which is an identity-driven approach to zero trust. And again, it's this idea that we need to make sure that we know who the users are, we know the employees, and we know how to restrict access, and we have controls in place that let us do that. And then, of course, there's that concept of continuous monitoring and what they call re-authentication. So you might see this in a Microsoft world, for example, where you have to periodically re-authenticate. In my company, it's every 12 hours I have to re-authenticate to my identity platform. So it will lock me out after 12 hours, and I have to go through a process to re-authenticate, and that includes that multi-factor piece where maybe I get a push sent to my phone or a code that's texted to me that I have to enter into a website, that sort of thing. And then there are a few government agencies that have also released information around their approach to zero trust and what that means for each of those agencies and how the government agencies should deploy those practices. So these frameworks are coming from places like the NSA, the Department of Defense, and even Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency. And quite often what happens in cybersecurity world is that the government will set up a standard, and the agencies will first go and meet that standard, and then the commercial organizations will follow behind and start to meet those as well. So anything that comes out of the government in terms of a standard like zero trust, you can expect that the commercial side of the world will eventually move there and get there and adopt those same standards. Okay, so let's pivot just a little bit and talk about malware and how we work to prevent that from a zero trust perspective.
Hey,
so
Daryl, real quick, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to slide the presentation up a little bit to center a little bit? It's cutting off on the right. Oh, the other direction. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So when we have to do business with other organizations or consumers, we have to share information. And the only way to share information is by packaging that information in some sort of data stream, whether it's on a phone call, in a text message, or in an email, in a attachment that we send out. There's lots of different ways, but in every case, there are risks to sharing that information via that data set. And because that data can contain malware, it can be hacked, it can be changed, it can be modified in flight, and sometimes those methods are hard to detect and clean. So there's always a risk involved in sharing that information in order to do business. And one of the challenges, of course, is figuring out how to protect from that risk and make sure that there are no issues when an employee opens an email and clicks an attachment or clicks a link, that sort of thing. And there are lots of tools and products out there today that help with that. So you've obviously got antivirus scanners out there. You've got companies like McAfee, Sophos, different things that have the idea of signature-based virus definitions and the ability to essentially go out and look for the known bad and find that and clean it out. And that's been a practice for a long time. The challenge with that is that in some cases, especially when newer threats are released, there are no known signature definitions or virus updates that you can get for that. And so there's a period of time, a kind of a sliding window where malware can exist and go undetected until those companies recognize the new signatures and figure out how to detect it and clean it out of a file. The approach that is involved from a zero trust perspective is a little bit different approach. So let's kind of talk through that and explain how it works from a document perspective. So in this case, I have a document that has some, let's call it a Word document. It's got a bunch of content in it. And on top of that, you can see this little insect here. It has some malicious content in it as well. So somebody has put in a bad web link, some code for it to reach out and connect to another server and download some additional bad content, that sort of thing. So what we want to do is make sure that we don't pass that information along, and that we are able to clean that document and make sure that when it arrives at its destination, it's a completely clean document with nothing malicious in it. Now, the approach from a zero trust perspective is to assume that all documents are bad and can contain malicious content. So there's, again, going back to that idea of zero trust, there is no trusting a document. We don't assume any document is safe or clean. So what we do instead is we take this document, and for each file type that's out there, a Word document, a PowerPoint, a PDF, an image file, they all have what's called an RFC specification. And from a standards perspective, it means that computers can understand and know what a Word document looks like, what a PDF document looks like, based on that specification. And if it doesn't match, then we know something is off, and it's content that doesn't belong in that document. So the zero trust approach basically says, I'm going to take all of the information that is inside of the document that matches the specification, and I'm going to extract it. I'm going to pull it out. And so in this case, we're talking about a Word document here. It will go and take all of the content from that Word document and pull it out. That includes everything from, paragraphs, all the text, the images, the formatting, what's in italics, what's in bold, the different fonts. All of that will be pulled out and extracted. And then what we do is we take that information and we verify that it matches the specification for a Word document with the information that we've pulled out. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, we left that malicious content behind. So we didn't grab that. We just ignored it essentially and left it behind. Once we have pulled that information out of the document and extracted it, then what we do is validate that it looks good. And if it does look good, then we go ahead and build a brand new file, a brand new Word document from that information, and then send it on to its destination. So the idea here is that rather than taking an existing document, scraping out all the bad stuff and throwing that away, and then sending the document along its way, instead, we build an entirely new document with only the good content from that file that matches that RFC specification. That gives us the ability to support a lot of different file formats, but ensure that as they move along in their journey, that they are clean and free from any kind of malware. And that includes the concept of what we call a zero-day threat. So a zero-day threat or vulnerability is a situation where a vulnerability exists. There's a security flaw in a document or in a product, but the vendor has either not been made aware of it yet, or has chosen not to patch it yet. And so there's a flaw out there, and it has the potential to be exploited by bad actors in the world. And we saw that just a few weeks ago. Microsoft had several Office zero-day threats that were released, and quite often when these are discovered, if it's discovered by a security company, they'll take that information to a vendor like Microsoft and say, hey, you've got a security problem with your product, you need to fix it and give them time to fix it. The challenge, of course, with zero-day threats is that you don't have a lot of time to react and to figure out how to clean those documents. The nice thing about this approach is that as you go through this concept of what we call CDR, content disarm and reconstruction, rebuilding the documents, it doesn't really matter if a zero-day threat is in that document. If it's brand new, if it's a week old, if it's a year old and nobody's discovered it, it doesn't matter. The approach that we take here gives us the ability to clean those documents and make sure that they're safe, and we just leave everything bad behind and ignore it. And I'll give you a good example here. We had a customer in Europe recently who has been running this process for several years, and they have not done a very good job of updating their applications. So we know that application updates come out periodically. These guys were about 5 years behind in terms of getting software updates in place. The Office malware zero-day threats came out a few weeks ago. They took some of those documents and those flawed documents and ran those through their software that was 5 years old, and it still caught them and cleaned everything out perfectly. So this concept of extracting the known good from a document and moving it to a new file or a new document and creating that and sending it on its way is a really solid approach, because it doesn't matter what the threat is or where it comes from. We just ignore it and move on, and it's not a big deal. And that means that you don't get false positives. There's quite a few benefits to this process. So let me talk about some different use cases and how we do this, right? So there are a few different ways to use this technology from a cybersecurity perspective inside of a business. The first way is really looking at this idea of secure web browsing with this zero trust CDR process. And the idea is that as you go out and visit websites, you are interacting with digital content, and that digital content could be malicious in nature. That even includes quite often ads. Sometimes ads are not necessarily a hacking attempt, but they can be annoying, and they can definitely include content that can redirect or track what you're doing on the web, that sort of thing. So the CDR process has the ability to actually go out and clean everything that you see on a web page. So it will clean attachments, documents that might be attached on a web page for you to download. It will clean images that show up on the web page, and it will clean even things like ads and making sure that those pop-up type things are clean and safe, so that nothing happens to your computer, your laptop, your endpoint while you're browsing that website. And so that's kind of the first use case, is this idea of really securing or locking down your web browsing experience to make sure that when you download information from the internet, that information is cleaned and protected, and there's no risk of anything coming through that would harm you. The second use case is really around secure email, and I should point out that the first use case focuses on web browsing, and that includes web-based email, so things like Gmail or Yahoo, that sort of thing. So if you are sending and receiving attachments in web-based email clients, then it would clean those as well. This use case focuses more on what we call on-premise email, looking at situations where a company is running what's called an email security gateway. So an inbound email would come in to an email server that's being run in a data center somewhere. That email server would essentially do what's called a sideload and say, hey, this email has an attachment. I'm going to send this email and this attachment off to a CDR service and have that CDR service clean that document, reattach it to the original email, and then we can send it on its way. The whole process just takes a few seconds. It doesn't impact the ability of an end user to get their job done. It doesn't delay any delivery of email or anything. It's very, very quick. But it gives you the ability to ensure that your documents are clean when they arrive in your inbox. So that includes phishing attempts. Even if a phishing email, for example, were to get through and it had a malicious attachment in it, we would clean that attachment and send it on its way. So if you opened it, nothing would happen. So that protects from an inbound perspective. We also have the ability to protect internal emails and to protect outbound emails as well. There is a cybersecurity hacking technique called steganography, and it is essentially the ability to hide or obfuscate data inside of an image. And it's amazing how much data you can actually hide in an image. We've got some sample files that we use to demonstrate, and we have the entire Pride and Prejudice novel buried inside of a single picture. We have another example where we have about 10,000 Excel rows or records from an Excel spreadsheet buried in a different picture. And there's a fairly famous use case that revolved around steganography with General Electric a few years ago. And they had an employee working for them who was a Chinese foreign national who was essentially emailing a picture of a sunset to his personal email. And he was doing that several times a day, and over the course of several months, emailed that exact same picture 5,000 times to his personal email. Most systems would look at that and say, oh, no big deal, it's a picture of a sunset, let it go through. But in reality, what he was doing was stealing a new jet engine design that GE had, stealing all of the documents that were tied to that design, and embedding those documents inside of that picture of the sunset, and then sending that off, where he would then extract that data and make that available to China. So the CDR process works in both directions, again, inbound, but it also works outbound and gives you the ability to clean images as well, so that as a user is, pasting images into a document or into an email and sending that on its way, we can clean those to make sure that there's nothing hidden inside of those images and that they are truly clean when they leave the organization. Okay, the last use case I'm going to talk about here is custom applications. So this is more around the idea of web uploads, if you will, situations where you might have applications that receive documents from, say, consumers or business partners, and you want to make sure that those are clean as well. So they're not running through an email type system or email gateway. A great example of this in your world would be mortgage applications, right? So somebody who is uploading documents for a mortgage application, it might be identity documents, it might be financial statements, that sort of thing. You want to make sure that as those documents come in, that they are clean and that you're not getting any type of malware from a user who is either intentionally trying to poison the system, or may just not know that they have malicious malware running around rampant on their computer, and when they scan in new documents, it embeds things in there, and they have no idea. So it gives you protection when you are dealing with applications that are accepting attachment uploads from various different places outside the organization, to make sure that, again, those files are entirely clean and safe to open, safe to use in every situation. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about the advantage. Why is this better than what we've done in the past? So I talked a little bit about the beginning, the concept of virus scanners and using tools to scan your computer and check all of your files and make sure that you don't have any malware or viruses in those files. The challenge, of course, with that is that we don't know from a zero-day perspective what's out there. We don't have the ability to detect it using that method. The advantage of using a zero trust method, again, assuming that every file is bad and that we need to clean it and reformat it before we send it along, it ensures that no malware can ever get through. You don't ever have any kind of problems with that malware, with zero-day threats. they can't get through. It's essentially future-proof. You don't have to go out and wait for the vendor to build virus definition updates or signature updates and go and download those and apply them to your environment. It's all done automatically in the back end, and it doesn't matter if new 0 days come out next week or next month or next year. We already have the ability to prevent those attacks inside of those documents. The second benefit is really looking at it from a pure usability perspective. How much effort does it take to maintain and manage a CDR process in cleaning documents? And the answer is almost nothing. Once you put it in place, there's very, very little interaction that you have to do. The documents just flow from one place to another. They get cleaned and sent along their way. It's the same file type. It's the same file name. It's the same content in the file that a user would expect to see. So if they received a Word document from let's say, an external email, that document would look exactly the same as when it left the inbox of the person who sent it from the external company. There's no visible changes at all. It's a completely, pixel perfect, if you will, from an image perspective or revisable document. It looks just like the original, but it has been essentially deconstructed and recreated before it was sent on its way. But this means that there's no false positives. Every document is always clean all the time, and there's no need to pull those virus definition updates. There's no need to go out and update legacy applications in a rush. You have time to work through that. We can work with those processes to make sure that those documents stay clean. In terms of where this runs, this service, you have a lot of different options. So we have API services that run in providers like AWS, for example, where you can simply make a call from your application, send a document to AWS, have it cleaned, and have it returned a few seconds later and sent along its way. You can also deploy this in a local data center, either through an appliance, a hardware appliance, or through virtual means. Gives you the ability to deploy in a lot of different ways, a lot of different options to ensure that you have really quick performance. And again, it's fast, what we call stateless performance. It's running in memory. It's optimized to run in memory. So documents, even as large as 100 megabytes only take a few seconds to clean and send along their way. So there's really no impact from an end user perspective. You send an email, and that user that you sent it to will get that email within just a few seconds with clean attachments within it. Okay, so let's kind of wrap up with this concept of an optimal zero trust state. So we've really spent most of our time here talking about the idea of malware risk and documents and how we deal with that. So if we circle back to our castle and moat example at the beginning, there's a lot more that's involved in access than just dealing with documents. So the zero trust framework has a lot of different areas where you can build out principles, and you can increase and improve your security posture in several different areas. So we talked a little bit about the castle and moat idea of, hey, if you're an employee and the security guard lets you across the bridge over the moat and into the castle, then you're good and you have access. There's some challenges with that, and we saw that during the pandemic. We saw a huge increase in the number of VPN connections specifically, and the number of personal devices that were allowed to connect over VPN into those corporate networks. For a lot of different companies, they didn't have enough laptops and things to send with their employees to go work from home. So instead, they said, yeah, go ahead and use your iPad, use your own personal laptop. We'll just give you a VPN client and you can connect in and do your work that way. The challenge with that approach is that you're essentially saying you don't even have to cross the moat physically. We'll let you cross the moat digitally through that VPN client, and now you can access all of the castle's resources from a personal device. The challenge there, of course, is that now you've lost control of that information and whether or not it's being stored on a personal device. If somebody's copying down some attachments to work on them at home in off hours, now you've lost control of that document, and that data could be lost. So the idea behind Zero Trust is to really limit in a lot of different categories. And you can see these on the slide here. You got things like identity. So looking at how do we ensure that the user who is logging in says they are who they say they are, and how do we make sure that over time that doesn't change, and we have the ability to monitor. And in some cases, that even includes looking at what we call a behavioral analysis of that individual. So we have somebody who normally logs in and works 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and all of a sudden we start seeing them pop up and attempt to log in at 4 a.m. on a Saturday or a Sunday. They're not typically doing work then. So when those situations occur, and when you have something like a user risk that increases over time, then what you can do is you can essentially enforce additional policies around Zero Trust, going back to this idea that we shouldn't trust anybody anytime implicitly. So in a situation like that, what you can do is you can force the user to do what's called a step-up verification, or basically a response challenge type request from the security guard standing at the moat, right? Saying, hey, look, you want access to the castle, but you're dressed differently than you normally are. So I'm going to challenge you, and you're going to have to prove your identity through a multi-factor authentication event, an additional push notification or a PIN code or something to make sure that we can validate that identity. And that concept applies to some of the other areas as well. So looking at networks, how we break down network traffic coming into the organization. And in some cases, when we look at applications, for example, you might have 10 applications in the organization that employees need access to. There might be, Microsoft Office applications, it might be Outlook, that generally every employee needs to access. And then you might have additional applications that only certain employees are allowed to access. Might be a specific title search application, or MLS or something. And so you can limit who can access those applications based on a Zero Trust concept. So rather than just having a VPN client that opens it up to the entire world once you log in, you can limit that, right? So if you're, again, an employee crossing that mode and entering the castle, you only see the kitchen and maybe a pantry, because that's your role and that's your limitation. You can't see any of the other rooms in the castle and what's involved in that, what data is stored there. And then the concept applies also to devices and to application workloads. And then we've talked, of course, about data and how we protect from a Zero Trust perspective there. I think that's about it from a content perspective. Just to wrap up here, one of the things that is really important to consider from a Zero Trust perspective when you're looking at these technologies, it's looking at companies who deal from a prevention perspective rather than a reaction perspective. And when you look at malware, for example, malware is a great example of a very reactive type approach that we've had in the industry for several years. So a document gets sent to you, you download that document from your email and stick it on your hard drive. Then you have a virus scanner that kicks off once a week and scans those documents, and maybe it finds something, maybe it doesn't. But it's reacting to a situation where you've already got the malware, it's already downloaded, it's already on your network and on your laptop. Whereas with the Zero Trust CDR process, you have prevention built in so that document is clean before it ever enters the organization, and it's clean before it gets to your inbox and before you have the chance to download it and save it. So there's no need to do a virus scan of it later on because we know it's clean. And those technologies can be built into application flows and built into email gateways, that sort of thing, rather than just bolted on after the fact. It gives you the peace of mind that every document coming into the organization is clean and ready to be used and opened and is safe every single time. And then, of course, from a pure technology perspective, you want to make sure that when you're looking at that zero trust framework and those principles, that you can apply those in different areas of the organization, not just in documents, but also on identities, proving who individuals are, and on network access, accessing applications, all of that, so that comprehensively you can protect the entire organization with that zero trust framework. Now, we've seen a lot of companies start to implement those principles, and we're starting to see adoption of some of those government type pillars and frameworks that we talked about earlier. And that approach is going to just get stronger as we try and stay safe in this crazy world, and try and stay clean from a document perspective, and make sure that we're not implicitly trusting anybody, but we're applying those zero trust principles to make sure that we're protected in every stage of an evolution of data movement inside the organization.
Daryl, I wanted to kind of build upon that real quick as far as kind of the evolution of this technology. Zero trust has been long since been a goal of our defense industry and our government, but it didn't always scale down. Now, over the last few years, the way we implement our product, it's scaling down to medium and small businesses alike, and so they can have kind of defense-grade technology for the mid-market accounts that you guys are working with. For example, ALTA organization is using our technology. They've been using it for a couple years, and that's one of the reasons why they asked us to kind of share this information with them, because they are a believer in this technology. It protects them, it protects our clients, and we just wanted to kind of communicate to you guys that with you don't have to have a high grade security network to implement this type of methodology. You can implement it through Office 365. There's a few clicks that you can integrate with, and so now all email through M365 can kind of go through the zero trust CDR methodology and protect all your emails going through this methodology. So just want to add that.
Yep, thanks, Gary. Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. And you're right. We have seen adoption of some of these technologies kind of move down outside the government space and move down the industrial complex, if you will, in terms of affordability and options for smaller companies to take advantage of some of these technologies, for sure.
It's really big in the financial industry because of the need to share so many documents back and forth. Financial industry really benefits from this methodology more so than others.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things we do when we do demonstrations of this technology, we have essentially a fake mortgage application site that we built that we use to demonstrate the concept of an individual applying for a mortgage, uploading documents that might be tied to that, and then making sure those documents are clean when the mortgage company decides to review all of those documents. So it's even, from a demonstration perspective, we use that concept because it is so popular in the financial space in terms of document movements and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that is all the content that I had today. Are there any additional questions that have come up?
All right. Well, thanks, Daryl and Gary. Yeah, you mentioned ALTA. We do use ForcePoint for our registry when members are uploading documents for that to make sure there's no malware. So we are definitely users of the software as well. Yeah, just a reminder, any questions on zero trust, security, malware, pitch them into the questions box, and we'll spend some minutes some time answering your questions. I had a couple of questions. So this can be used for, email. Can it be used for products like Teams? Teams is kind of an internal communications, but we use Teams if other organizations are on Teams, and we'll have meetings, and sometimes we share documents that way. Can this be applied to that as well? Is that part of the castle?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an area where we're working to improve. So we don't support Teams directly today, but we are working on building in some capabilities to allow that to occur. Obviously, if you move any of those documents outside of Teams and you attach them to an email, that sort of thing, then we would clean that. But we do have some sidecar capabilities where we can script in support for things like Teams and SharePoint and make that function. So, but we are working to make that more mainstream.
That would require some professional services to kind of do some of those connections and scripting, like Daryl had said.
And Daryl, you mentioned pictures. Malware can be embedded in pictures. Does that include memes? So, if you get the funny meme from, someone from your realtor friend or your lender, just be cautious.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. Those images can contain anything from just hidden data to malicious links. I've even seen documents, images where you hover over a portion of the image. You don't even actually click on it with your mouse, but you hover over it, and it can open a web page. So there are definitely ways to hide that malware inside of images. Memes would definitely count as part of that for sure.
And Daryl, I don't know, you might know more specifics about this than me, but do you recall the kitten? There's an image of a kitten that was shared, 10 million times, and that image had something embedded in it. It wasn't malicious, but it was something that was embedded in it just to kind of show how vulnerable people are, because it was shared so many times. It was just a cute picture that was shared 10 million times, and it had embedded scripting in it. Luckily, it turned out to be not a threat, but it kind of shows the principle of kind of the amount of documents that are shared amongst us all.
Yeah, when you think about memes and those images that go viral overnight, right, and get shared thousands or millions of times, the damage that could be done is tremendous, right? So that's why this technology is so important, to make sure that when you are sharing documents and whether it's through email or whatever method it might be, in a Telegram chat or whatever, that you have those clean, so that there's no risk of malware coming into the organization, and no risk of your employees absent-mindedly sending out malware to other organizations without knowing it.
So what happens to the code, the malware code? Is there a dumping ground where it's just stored, or is it just deleted? Or
yeah, it's a great question, right? So because we're essentially ignoring the bad and just dealing with the good and rebuilding those good files, moving them along, yeah, we basically just discard all of that garbage that shouldn't be in the file and just throw it in the Bitbucket repository, and it's just garbage. Yep, it's just gone.
Okay. And from a business operations viewpoint, you said there's really no disruption in getting or sending information. It happens seamlessly behind the scenes.
Yeah. When you think of email, for example, right? You build an email, you type it out, you attach a document to it, and you send that off. The user who's receiving that, even if they're aware that it's coming, it may take a couple of extra seconds to clean that document, but they don't see, there's no perceptible delay, if you will, in delivering that email from a user perspective. So same thing with documents that get uploaded to a web portal. Same thing if you're browsing the web and cleaning. We talked about cleaning ads and attachments and images on web pages. Same thing. You can click on a web page and open a new web page, and we clean that, and you don't feel like there's a delay in that web page loading. It's all very, very fast behind the scenes.
Okay. How long, would you estimate it would take to train your staff to implement and follow this strategy?
There's not much training in terms of staff, because once you implement the technology, it's invisible to the end user, right? So somebody who is downloading a document or grabbing something, saving something from an email attachment, it's already clean. So when they see it, there's nothing for them to do or interact with. The only difference or challenge there would be if it's a file format that we don't currently support, that we can't clean today. Then in some cases, if you look at, for example, an Excel document with macros are script that could be good or could be bad. So because we don't know, we let the administrator of the system determine what to do with that macro. So we can hold it and then let an admin come in and determine whether or not it should be allowed, or you can kind of whitelist documents with macros, or you can blacklist and drop them all. But beyond that, generally speaking, if it's a file format that is supported and cleaned, there is nothing for employees to really learn because it all happens behind the scenes, and it's just clean when it arrives.
And that's one of the biggest advantages, because so often companies put that burden on the employees. Don't click on this, don't open that, don't forward this. And everybody's got anxiety every time they get an email, right? And knowing that everything in your email is safe relieves employees of that burden of, can I click? Yes, you can click. You don't have to worry about it. It can be from Timbuktu, and you can click it if it goes through our CDR services.
Okay. And one final question, or just a reminder for anyone, if you have anything we haven't touched on, any questions for the panelists. So training, not a whole lot there. How about implementation or integration with any existing technology a title company may already have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me focus on Microsoft Office, for example. So if you're using M365 for your email service from Microsoft, then it takes about an hour to go through and set up and tie into the Microsoft email service and set up what we call mail flow rules, so that when Microsoft receives an email that you send, it sends it off to have that document cleaned from the CDR service, and then returns it back so that Microsoft can then go and deliver that email to the intended recipient. So, a situation like that, it takes about an hour to set up, and then it's good, and you're off and running. It's not a big deal. For things like let's say an application upload, maybe you have a web application that accepts documents uploaded from consumers. That would take a little bit longer time just to determine, do we run this in AWS? Do we run it in your data center? How does that function, right? So we would just have to figure out how to set that up. But even then, it's just installing an appliance, setting up a few rules, and you're off and running. It's not a big deal.
Okay. Daryl and Gary, I don't know if you'd mind just dropping in your email in the chat box for anyone who might be interested in reaching out and learning more about Zero Trust.
Sure.
Just a reminder for everyone, if you missed parts of today's webinar, or if you think others in your office would benefit from listening, you'll get a link to the recording of the presentation tomorrow. And again, all of our webinars are archived on our website at alta.org/webinars. Anything else to add, Daryl or Gary, before we wrap up today?
No, thank you for your time.
Okay, all right. I need to thank SoftPro once again for sponsoring today's webinar, and that will bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.